Ladies and gentlemen, there comes a moment in every woman's life when her silence becomes louder than her words, stronger than her effort, and more powerful than her love. And that's the moment he never saw coming. Because while he was busy thinking you'd always be there, you were busy becoming someone he wouldn't recognize, someone who doesn't chase, someone who doesn't beg, someone who doesn't wait for clarity that should have been given freely. He thought no contact would make him forget you. He didn't realize it would make you remember who you are. And once a woman remembers her worth, nothing and no one is ever ready for the force she becomes. When you finally pulled back, when you finally chose silence over chasing, clarity over chaos, peace over proving yourself, something happened that he never expected. He thought your absence would feel like freedom. He thought the distance would make him lighter. He thought the space would confirm that he didn't need you, didn't miss you, didn't think about you. But that's because he had no idea who you were becoming the moment you stopped trying to convince him of your worth. He wasn't ready for the version of you that stepped back, not out of fear, not out of insecurity, not out of games, but out of a deep and powerful realization that you deserve to be met with the same energy you give. He wasn't ready for what happens when a woman stops explaining, stops rehearsing her value, and simply allows someone to feel the loss of her presence. You see, no contact isn't about punishment. It isn't about manipulation. It's not about making someone chase for the sake of ego. It's about giving yourself the emotional space to breathe again. It's about remembering who you are outside of someone's inconsistencies. It's about finding the strength to let a situation teach you instead of drain you. And the moment you stepped away, truly stepped away, something shifted, not just in him, but in you. Because the truth is, he wasn't ready for the quiet confidence that comes from a woman who finally realizes she doesn't need to beg for what she deserves. When you stopped trying to be chosen, you started choosing yourself. When you stopped waiting for his text, his effort, his clarity, you created room for your power to return. And that is something no one is prepared for. Not the person who underestimated you. And not even you until it begins happening. He wasn't ready to face the version of himself that shows up when you're no longer there to soften his edges, excuse his distance, or interpret his mixed signals. He wasn't ready to confront how much he relied on your effort to keep the connection alive. He wasn't ready to see the stark difference between your consistency and his complacency. And he definitely wasn't ready to feel the weight of your absence, because absence doesn't hit all at once. It builds, slowly, quietly, and then suddenly, it crashes. In the silence, he starts replaying the moments you cared in ways he overlooked. The times you listened without judgment. The comfort of knowing you would always try. And for the first time, he feels the imbalance he never admitted. He can't just pretend it doesn't affect him. He can't just distract himself into forgetting. Because when a woman with a genuine heart goes quiet, it echoes, and it forces a man to sit with every part of himself he has avoided. But here's the real magic. No contact isn't about making him wake up. It's about making you wake up. Waking up to the reality that your peace is worth protecting. Waking up to the understanding that love isn't proven by how long you tolerate confusion. Waking up to the confidence that you have options, you have value, and you have a life outside of someone who couldn't show up for you in the way you deserved. And when you wake up like that, when you step into that new energy, he won't be ready. Not because he doesn't care, but because he never imagined you would actually stop giving, stop waiting, stop hoping he'd finally turn into the person he promised you he could be. He wasn't ready for the glow you get when you heal, the glow that comes from treating yourself with the love you kept trying to give him, the glow of someone who is reconnecting with her passions, her standards, her worth. He wasn't ready for the moment you stopped needing him to validate anything about you. And make no mistake, there is something incredibly attractive about a woman who no longer ties her identity to whether someone stays or leaves. A woman who can love deeply but walk away gracefully when she isn't met with respect. A woman who knows that distance isn't a weapon, it's a boundary. This is why no contact becomes transformative. It's not about silence, it's about self-respect. It's not about making him suffer, it's about freeing yourself from suffering. It's not about whether he comes back, it's about whether you come back to yourself. Because here's what he wasn't ready for. You outgrowing the old version of yourself that tolerated the bare minimum. He wasn't ready for you to realize that love isn't measured by how much pain you can endure. He wasn't ready for you to evolve from someone who needed closure from him to someone who gives closure to herself. And the moment that shift happens, everything changes. Suddenly, the power dynamic isn't built on fear of loss. Suddenly, you're not the one waiting, you're the one choosing. He becomes the one wondering, questioning, replaying. Not because you wanted to flip the script, but because you finally wrote a new one for yourself. He wasn't ready to see you invest in your growth. He wasn't ready to see you reconnect with your confidence. He wasn't ready to watch you become unavailable, not emotionally, not mentally, not energetically, to the version of him that once took you for granted. And in that moment, he realizes that losing someone's effort is far more painful than losing someone's attention. Effort is rare. Effort is meaningful. Effort is irreplaceable. Attention is everywhere. But your heart is not. But the beauty of this whole journey is that your transformation doesn't rely on what he does next. Whether he reaches out or stays silent, whether he regrets or repeats old habits, whether he grows or stays the same, that's his path, not yours. Your path is about rising into the version of yourself who doesn't chase love, but attracts it. The version of yourself who understands that no contact isn't the end of the story, it's the beginning of a new one. One where you choose peace, one where you choose clarity, one where you choose a love that looks like partnership, not potential. And the truth is, he wasn't ready for that kind of strength. He wasn't ready for the woman who doesn't need to be chosen to feel worthy. He wasn't ready for the woman who no longer explains why she deserves better. She simply lives like she does. He wasn't ready for your rebirth, but you were. And the reason he wasn't ready is because he never imagined that the very silence he once interpreted as weakness would become the exact thing that made you stronger. When you stepped back, you didn't just remove your sense. You removed your emotional labor, your comfort, your reassurance, your steady belief in him. You removed the version of you that tolerated uncertainty. And what he's beginning to realize is that the person you were before no contact is gone. Not in a bitter way, but in a beautifully evolved way. Because something remarkable happens when you stop trying to fix someone who won't meet you halfway. You start fixing the parts of yourself you neglected. You start remembering the dreams you put on hold, the passions you silenced, the standards you softened just to make things work. You take all that energy you were pouring into someone else, and you begin pouring it back into your own life. And that is the exact moment everything starts shifting. He wasn't ready to see you become someone who no longer gets pulled back in by mixed signals, someone who no longer falls for breadcrumbs disguised as effort, someone who no longer mistakes attention for intention. He wasn't ready for the version of you who doesn't cling to potential because she finally recognizes her own value too clearly to settle for most. And deep down, he never expected you to reach this point. He thought you'd always be there. He thought your patience was unlimited. He thought your heart would always override your boundaries. But there comes a moment, quiet, calm, but undeniable, when a woman realizes her breaking point is actually her turning point. You didn't break, you transformed, and that transformation didn't happen out of revenge. It happened out of necessity. You knew you couldn't keep living in a space where you were always waiting, always hoping, always overthinking. You couldn't keep shrinking yourself to fit into the small spaces he offered. So you created a new space, your space, where your needs weren't optional, your feelings weren't minimized, and your worth wasn't up for debate. He wasn't ready to feel the difference between a woman who is emotionally available and a woman who is emotionally selective. You became selective, not closed off, not guarded, but intentional. Selective about who gets your time, selective about who earns your vulnerability, selective about who gets access to your softness. And when a woman becomes selective, everything about her energy becomes more powerful, more grounded, more magnetic. Your silence didn't just take you away from him, it brought you back to yourself. And when you come back to yourself, everything about you becomes clearer. Your standards become clearer, your boundaries become clearer, your desires become clearer, your deal breakers become clearer, and clarity is something people can feel, even from a distance. He feels it. He feels that you're not waiting anymore. He feels that the dynamic has shifted. He feels that he no longer gets the version of you who overgives and under-receives. And this is where his confusion begins, not because he doesn't understand what's happening, but because he never expected you to outgrow the version of him you once loved. And you did love him. You cared deeply. You tried more times than anyone will ever know. You showed up when it was hard. You communicated when it was uncomfortable. You gave the benefit of the doubt even when it cost you peace. But love without reciprocity becomes exhaustion. Caring without effort becomes emotional debt. Consistency without clarity becomes self-betrayal. And you finally decided you were done betraying yourself. He wasn't ready for what happens when a woman stops betraying herself. Because the moment you choose yourself, everything you accept changes. You're not available for confusion anymore. You're not available for half efforts. You're not available for someone who only realizes your value when they fear losing you. You're not available for chaos disguised as passion. You're not available for emotional bare minimums that you once convinced yourself were enough. You raised your standards, not as a threat, not as an ultimatum, but as a reflection of who you're becoming. And that is something he didn't prepare for. He thought you'd always negotiate your needs, but you're not negotiating anymore. You're not shrinking anymore. You're not settling anymore. You're not pausing your life, your dreams, your joy, just to keep someone comfortable. And here's the part he truly wasn't ready for. The peace you found. You found peace in not knowing what he would do next. You found peace in not needing answers anymore. You found peace in understanding that closure doesn't come from someone else. It comes from the moment you decide you deserve more. You found peace in the space you created for yourself, in the clarity you gained, in the strength you rebuilt. And that peace makes you powerful. You became the version of yourself he always feared you'd become. The version who realizes she never needed him to become whole. You may have wanted him, but you didn't need him. And when you step into that kind of independence, it shakes everything around you. It shakes the people who benefited from your self-doubt. It shakes the people who relied on your insecurity. It shakes the people who took your effort for granted because they believed you would always stay. He wasn't ready for the moment you stopped being emotionally accessible to his inconsistency. Because now, if he wants access to you, something has to change. Not because you're demanding it, but because your energy already has. You no longer respond to the same patterns. You no longer react to the same behaviors. You no longer feel pulled into the emotional roller coaster you once tolerated. You've grown past the dynamics he's still comfortable with. He wasn't ready to meet a new version of you while he stayed the same. And that's what no contact revealed, not who he is, but who you are without the noise, without the mixed messages, without the emotional tug of war. It showed you the strength that was always there beneath the anxiety, the confidence beneath the self-doubt, the worth beneath the waiting. And in this new clarity, you start to see the truth. Someone who truly values you will never make you question your place in their life. Someone who truly cares will never risk losing someone like you out of laziness or fear. Someone who is truly ready for you won't need distance to realize your value. They'll recognize it in your presence. But someone who wasn't ready for your heart will only understand your worth in your absence. And now he's beginning to understand it. He's starting to feel the space where you used to be. He's starting to replay the little things he dismissed. He's starting to realize that the emotional connection he took for granted was something rare, something real, something he thought he could pick up again whenever he wanted, until he realized you're not waiting at the same emotional doorway anymore. But here's the beautiful part. You didn't evolve so he would chase you. You evolved because you finally saw what you deserve. And that alone changes everything. Because when a woman knows her worth, she stops entertaining people who don't. In the end, he wasn't ready for the woman who walked away. But the woman who walked away was exactly who you needed to become. And the woman you needed to become is the one who finally recognizes that her evolution was never dependent on whether he understood it. You didn't grow so someone else would suddenly see your value. You grew because staying the same was costing you too much. You grew because your heart was tired of repeating lessons it had already learned. You grew because something inside you whispered that you deserved a life that didn't keep you in a loop of uncertainty. And once you listened to that whisper, everything inside you began to shift. He wasn't ready for the version of you who no longer waits for emotional permission to move forward. You gave yourself permission. You gave yourself freedom. You gave yourself the choice to rewrite your story. And that choice made you unstoppable. You didn't ask him if it was okay for you to heal. You didn't check to see if the timing worked for him. You didn't pause your growth to wait for him to catch up. You simply decided to rise, and you rose. The version of you that exists now is grounded. She knows her heart is powerful, but she no longer lets that power be used against her. She understands that loving deeply isn't a weakness. Loving without reciprocation is what drains the spirit. She understands that giving isn't the problem. Giving to someone who doesn't know how to receive is what creates emotional exhaustion. She understands that commitment isn't a burden. Committing to the wrong person is what creates confusion. And because you've gained that wisdom, the way you move through the world has changed. You're not rushing anything anymore. You're not trying to force anything to fit. You're not romanticizing potential. You're not carrying the emotional weight someone else refused to hold. You're not arguing with someone's inability to see your worth. You're not trying to prove that you deserve love. You know you do. And this is why he feels the shift so intensely. He senses the detachment, the freedom, the lightness in you. He senses that you're no longer emotionally anchored to the version of him you once hoped he would become. You've emotionally unclenched. You've let go, gently but completely. You've released the idea of what the connection could have been, and in doing so, you've stepped fully into what your life can be. He wasn't ready for that kind of release because he never thought you'd get there. He always believed you'd stay emotionally tethered, even if the connection wasn't fulfilling you. People who underestimate you often assume you won't change until it's too late. They assume their inconsistency is enough to keep you confused. They assume their minimal effort is enough to keep you hopeful. They assume the emotional crumbs they offer are enough to keep you waiting. But a moment comes when the heart stops chasing the same outcome. A moment when the mind gets clear. A moment when the soul gets tired of repeating pain disguised as love. And that moment came for you, quietly but with tremendous power. He wasn't ready for what it looks like when a woman reclaims her emotional power. Because now, when he thinks of you, he doesn't imagine the version of you who overextended, who forgave too quickly, who excused too often. He thinks of the version of you he lost access to, the version who no longer responds to inconsistency, who no longer bends to. Make him comfortable, who no longer gives energy to someone who treats her as an afterthought. And that realization doesn't just sting, it transforms the way he sees himself. Your absence has become a mirror he can't avoid, a mirror that reflects the effort he didn't give, the love he didn't nurture, the opportunity he didn't seize. And for the first time, he sees the role he played in losing access to someone extraordinary. It's not regret over losing attention, it's regret over losing connection. Real connection, the kind he didn't realize was rare until it was gone. And while he's wrestling with that realization, your life is expanding. You're rediscovering old parts of yourself. You're reconnecting with your dreams. You're meeting people who treat you with clarity, with consistency, with genuine curiosity. You're attracting better because you're vibrating higher. You're receiving opportunities that were waiting for you to stop pouring into the wrong places. You're stepping into a version of yourself that feels aligned, confident, self-aware, and deeply peaceful. You've stopped waiting for someone to choose you. You're choosing yourself every day now. And what that does is shift the energy you attract. People can feel the difference between a woman who is seeking validation and a woman who already carries her own. People can feel when you're rooted in your worth instead of earnestly searching for it in someone else's hands. And because you've changed, the way love will enter your life will change too. You're no longer drawn to the loudest voice. You're drawn to the clearest one. You're no longer impressed by effort that lasts a few days. You're attracted to consistency that lasts indefinitely. You're no longer pulled toward emotional chaos. You're drawn toward emotional safety. You're no longer enamored by someone's potential. You're aligned with someone's reality. This is the version of you he wasn't ready for. He wasn't ready for the woman who outgrew the dynamic he was comfortable in. He wasn't ready for the woman whose standards evolved beyond what he was willing to give. He wasn't ready for the woman who no longer defines love as struggle. He wasn't ready for the woman who finally sees herself clearly. And maybe he will try to come back. Maybe he will reach out, confused by the change in your energy. Maybe he will talk about missing you, realizing what he lost or wanting another chance. And you may listen, you may reflect, you may acknowledge what once was, but the difference now is that you won't make decisions from fear. You won't say yes because you're lonely. You won't go back because of nostalgia. You won't reopen a chapter that cost you peace just because it once held passion. You'll make choices from strength, not desperation, from clarity, not confusion, from self-respect, not longing. And even if a part of him hoped he could walk back into your life as easily as he walked out, he wasn't ready for the woman who learned how to close a door without bitterness. The woman who knows that walking away isn't weakness, it's wisdom. The woman who understands that sometimes the heart has to detach for the soul to breathe again. He wasn't ready for the woman who came back home to herself. And this is the truth he will eventually have to face. The silence he once misunderstood wasn't emptiness. It wasn't indifference. It wasn't cruelty. It was the sound of you rebuilding, the sound of you healing, the sound of you reclaiming your life, the sound of you rising beyond the level where he left you. Because you didn't just go silent, you elevated. And once you elevate, you don't come back down to the places that broke you. He wasn't ready for your evolution, but your evolution was the most powerful choice you ever made.